Hello everybody and welcome back to the second shelf and to another recent reads video on Sunday. I haven't done one of those in quite a while, and that's mainly because a lot of what I read over the last couple of months or weeks were books from the Man Booker long list, and I do separate videos reviewing those, at least the books by female writers. But I have read other books, and there are at least, I think I have 4, maybe 5 books that I think are worthwhile talking to you about. And the first, it's actually 5, I counted. I'm bad at counting. But anyway, the first one is this one, Affinity Corner, Mischling, published in 2016. If you're following my channel, you might remember that I hauled this book in one of my Amsterdam book hauls. And in this haul, I said wrongly that this would be a debut book, but it's not. Affinity Corner is a Californian writer from Jewish descent, and she wrote another book in 2009 before this one. But anyway, this is a difficult book to read and also a difficult book to recommend. It's set in 1944 for the first big part of the book in Auschwitz, and we follow 2 sisters, 2 young girls, Pearl and Stasha, twins, who arrive at Auschwitz with their uncle and their mother. And the 2 girls are immediately seized by Mengele for his horrific twin experiments. The book tells the story from Pearl's and Stasha's point of view, alternating. And we learn that after a couple of weeks, Stasha disappears. We don't know what happened to her. And then the second part of the book is set after the liberation of Auschwitz concentration camp, so after the war, when Pearl goes looking for Stasha because she still feels that her twin is alive. A difficult book to read, obviously, because of the setting, and even though the writing is rather lyrical, we go into the heads of these 2 young girls, but of course Affinity Corner doesn't spare us the circumstances. She does so in a way that is not as if it came straight out of a horror movie with a lot of gore and blood and things like that. She does so with a lot of respect, but still it remains, the fact remains that the circumstances and the experiments and the life in the concentration camps are horrible. I really, really thought it was a great book. But I also know that this book is not for every reader. You really have to want to experience this world, to force yourself to read about horrors in Auschwitz. And I can fully understand that this is not for everyone. But if you think you can take it, and the writing is beautiful. I don't know whether I mentioned that already. I can certainly recommend it. You might want to give it a try, but again, I can understand if you say, well, this is just not for me. The second book I want to talk to you about that I read recently is historical fiction, Margaret George, The Confessions of Young Nero, published in 2017. This was a buddy read for me with Mel over from Mel's Bookland Adventures. I will leave a link to her channel down below. Please subscribe if you haven't yet, because you're missing out. And we read this book together over the course of a week. It's now let me back up. If you read a lot of historical fiction, you might know Margaret George. She's an American author born in Nashville, but she has lived all over the place, in Berlin, in Taiwan, and she writes mainly historical fiction. She wrote a book about Cleopatra, about Mary Stuart, if I'm not mistaken. If you're following my channel, you know that I don't read a lot of historical fiction. I didn't know her. I have never read anything by her. Mel and I think Mel will probably talk about the book, so I shouldn't speak for her. She can do that perfectly well all by herself. Um, but the book is told from Nero's perspective, so in the first person, from when he was a young boy, about 3 or 4, until he became emperor in his late teens. It's actually the first part of a book in 2 parts, so it ends with the burning of Rome, without I mean, it's not a proper ending of a book because it's a book in 2 parts. The second part will come out this year and will take off just when the first book starts. So actually, it's not one book, this one, but it's sort of part of a book. Anyway, I'm digressing. So it's told in first person from Nero's perspective, alternating not that often, but now I think 4 or 5 times we switch to a different perspective. One is Locusta. She's a Roman poisoneress, if that is a word. So her trade is, to sell poison to people. And the other perspective we get a glimpse of once or twice is one of Nero's lover, a young former slave. And the difficulty for me is that I raced through the book. It's really fast paced, well written. You just want to know what's going to happen next. So in that sense, it's a good book. But for some reason, it didn't grab me at all. I read some background information that the author gave about the book and said that she wanted to paint a different picture of Nero, meaning not the picture that we know of Nero, the crazy emperor, one of the worst emperors of Rome ever. I don't know whether she succeeded, not for me at least. First of all, because the book is written in the first person, it's obvious that you immediately think, yeah, well, that's an unreliable narrator, because even if the person paints himself as being a good guy, it's first person, so it's not necessarily true. But secondly, and more importantly for me, I thought the picture that Nero himself painted of himself was not that different from the Nero that I had in mind. And these two things together, I don't know, it's just a book that you read and you forget. At least it was for me. So was nothing in there that really grabbed me, that showed me something different. I don't know, maybe because I'm don't read that much historical fiction, that could be one of the reasons. But even though the book sort of ends in the middle of the story with the burning down of Rome, I have no inclination to read the second part. So yeah, maybe if you love her style, if you love the author's style, then this might be a book for you if you read other books by her and love them. But for me, it was not a very successful read. The third book of my recent reads is a book at least if you read science fiction, you probably heard about, maybe even read it already, and that is the third book in the Wayfarer series by Becky Chambers. And this one is a record of a spaceborne few. It came out in July. I mentioned it in my July to be released video, of course. I loved the Wayfarer series. The first one, A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and then the second one, Close and Common Orbit. I liked the second one even more than the first one, and this third one is set in the same universe that you are familiar with, but all 3 books are actually, it's not a series continuing one story, so you can read each book independently, and certainly this one, the third one, Record of a Spaceborne Few, you don't need to have read the first 2 books to understand this one. For those of you who have read it or who have read the previous 2 books, this one is set time-wise at the end of the first book, and is connected in that sense loosely that one of the main characters in the first book, Ashby, who is the captain of the spaceship where all this is happening, the whole journey, the long journey to the small and angry planet. So Captain Ashby is the brother of one of the protagonists in Record of a Spaceborne Few. Record of a Spaceborne Few focuses on a different location, and that is the location of the Exodus fleet. For those of you who are not familiar with the series, the Exodus fleet is the fleet that the human race built in order to leave planet Earth when planet Earth was not livable anymore. A couple of people went to Mars and lived there, but there's the majority of people left in these huge ships, gigantic fleet of ships, and then they encountered, all the aliens that we are familiar with. If you read the other books, there are lots and lots and lots of aliens, alien species, so non-human sapient species. So this book focuses on people still living on these spaceships, even though they have encountered aliens and they could choose to live on other planets, but they choose to live there. And we follow a couple of different characters. For instance, Isabel, she is an archivist for the Exodus, so she makes records of everything that happened. We follow Kip, a young boy who is in his teenage years and has to decide what kind of work he wants to do for the Exodus fleet. You have Tessa, the sister of Ashby, and her husband and her two young children. You have Sawyer, who is originally a grounder, quote unquote, meaning somebody living on a planet, but he doesn't like his life there, so he decides to immigrate onto the Exodus fleet. And in typical Becky Chambers fashion, the book is heavily depending on character, not so much on plot. You have not an overarching plot, but you have the life stories of each of the protagonists, and you have in between, you have the records of one of the alien races who visits the Exodus fleet in order to learn more about the humans who live there. I loved it. I was in the mood for a read like this. I love the characters. I love those non-human sapiens. I loved the different life stories of the protagonists. So for me, it was a really good, enjoyable read. I know that some people didn't like the book as much because the plot seems a bit flimsy. Like I said, there's no overarching plot line. But if you're just into this kind of space opera indulgence and good characters and interesting lives, then I think you might like it as well. The third book was also a book from one of the more recent Amsterdam halls, and that's this one, New People by Nancy Senna, published in 2016, I believe, but I will leave the correct date down in the show notes. It's not a debut. She has written novels before. Senna is a writer from Boston, American novelist. I have never heard of her. So this was my first experience with her work, and New People refers to people in the 1990s. So the book is set in 1996-ish in Brooklyn, who blur racial boundaries. You have the two main characters, Khalil, who is from a black Jewish background, and Maria, our main protagonist who tells us the story. She has been adopted by a black mother, but her own background is also mixed race. Then you have Lisa, Khalil's sister, and those new people, blurring racial boundaries are the center of the story. But we are told the story mainly from Maria's perspective, who works on her dissertation. She lives together with Khalil. They are about to get married, and Maria's dissertation is about the Jonestown massacre. So there in the book a lot of references to that, about Maria's work, when she thinks about what to write, a little bit of her research. That is also part of the book. Khalil, on his part, he is working in the dot-com industry, trying to build up his own business with a friend of his. Maria gets obsessed, that's the core plot, gets obsessed with a poet, a black poet they meet during a reading. So the whole plot line is about Maria's obsession with this person, and yeah, she unravels completely in the course of the book. That's not a spoiler, you will realize that when you started reading. I liked the writing very much. I thought it was extremely well written, very into your face, but in a good way. So I can certainly recommend it if you're interested in that kind of story and that kind of topic. I must say that given my own background, I'm sure that I missed a lot of the biracial or racial references. I had to look up a couple of things, and I don't know whether even after looking up, whether I got all of it. I probably will have to reread it again to see, I'm sure there are more layers than that I have discovered. But anyway, it's a well-written novel about a biracial couple and a woman unraveling. So if that sounds interesting to you, I can certainly recommend it. And the last book is a debut novel in a new crime series, and that is Cass Freer, Sweet Little Lies, which came out just a couple of weeks ago, and it's the first in her new Kat Kinsella series. Cass Freer is an English writer. She studied history before now publishing her debut novel. The book is set in London in the present day, and is centering around this new investigator, Katrina Kinsella, in her late 20s. She's a detective constable, so she is just at the beginning of her career. I can see already that we will have 20 books in that series until Kat retires when she is in her 60s. Anyway, and it's a straight murder story. There's a female victim discovered, a woman in her mid-30s, and Kat and the team, including her boss, DCI Steele, a steely woman, they investigate the murder. But interlaced into that stories are flashbacks back to 1998, when Kat Kinsella was just a girl, and together with her family, her parents and her brother Noel and her sister Jackie, they went on a week vacation in Ireland, where her mother's family is from, and a girl living there, Marianne, disappeared, and Kat always thought her father had something to do with it, or at least he knows more than he says. Of course, the two stories, the murdered woman and the story in the past of the girl Marianne disappearing, are connected in the end. And I just loved it. I mean, the characters are really well drawn. Kat is your edgy, new investigator, ambitious, but also not sure of herself. The other characters around her are also well drawn. I would say maybe the only criticism that I have is that sometimes this very spicy dish had a little too much spice. So the scenes with Kat's colleagues are sometimes a little overdone in the sense of how detectives, joke with each other and how they interact with each other. It was a layer too thick, but it's a debut, and the story was really well developed. You could guess and you guess wrong. So just what you expect from a good crime novel. I enjoyed it a lot. I read it in one sitting. I wanted to know what happens. So that's always a good sign. And I'm definitely will keep an eye out for the second one in the series. So these were my 5 books for the recent reads on this Sunday. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let me know down in the comments whether you read any of the books that I've mentioned or are interested in any of them. Or, as always, talk to me about any other book you recently read. And I will see you all soon in my next video. Bye-bye.